Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. Mr. Woods, ExxonMobil Corporation now publicly acknowledges the climate crisis while privately funding organizations that promote climate denial or misinformation. Isn't it true that between 1998 and 2017, ExxonMobil Corporation spent $36 million with think tanks promoting climate denial?
I can't comment on the figure that you've offered up, but I would tell you that our position that we've taken.
Well, you would not disagree with that amount, would you?
I don't have the number, so I can't confirm or deny the amount. What I would tell you is the position that we take with the groups we work with is consistent with the position that we take publicly. We don't ask people to
deny climate change is being connected with CO2 emissions, correct?
Pardon? I'm sorry, I missed your question.
Yeah, you spent a lot of money to get across the false point that CO2 emissions do not impact climate.
No, I don't agree with that characterization. We do not spend money. We have long acknowledged the linkage between CO2 emissions and the risk of climate change.
Well, let me ask you this question. Back in 1979, ExxonMobil commissioned a groundbreaking study that discovered that fossil fuels released carbon emissions that would, quote, endanger humanity, end quote. However, isn't it true, Mr. Woods, that no operational changes were made to respond to the horrifying findings that the company's business operations and products were endangering humanity?
Congressman, I'm not aware of any unique understanding that we had in the science. We engaged with the broader community and worked with them to advance our own understanding. And as time passed and scientific understanding evolved, so did our position and the approach that we took to addressing emissions.
Well, let me ask you this question, sir. The American Petroleum Institute has known since as early as 1957 that carbon emissions were dangerously warming the atmosphere, and multiple studies published by ExxonMobil and BP found similar results in subsequent years, only to be publicized for the first time in 2015 and 2018, respectively. Mr. Woods, when did you first learn that CO2 emissions cause climate change?
Our company from the very early days have worked with the outside scientific group, and our understanding and our public position has been consistent with that understanding.
Well, let me ask Mr. Lawler the question. Mr. Lawler, when did you first learn that CO2 emissions cause climate change?
Thank you for the question. So BP was aware early on, very early on, that
was it before 20?
I would say before even in the 90s and 80s, we were aware of reports that were out there. There was a lot of science. There was a lot of debate that was published during that time period. But I would say that BP focused on the landmark IPCC study in 1996. And in 1997, our then CEO, John Brown, acknowledged that the scientific community
I want to break in right here. Research shows that between 2010 and 2018, only 2.3% of your investments per capital expenditures went to low carbon energies. Is that true?
Yes, sir, it's true. But what I would say is
and isn't it also true, Mr. Lawler, that BP earned $183.5 billion in 2020?
I'd have to check that figure. I know in
that means you could not tell me how much of that $183.5 billion was reinvested in clean energy production.
Well, are you speaking to revenue or profit? That number seems well.
You would know better than I.
Well, we had
you actually profited $183.5 billion in 2020.
Well, we had something called a replacement cost profit of around $4 to $5 billion in 2020.
Well, my question is, how much of that was reinvested in clean energy production?
So in the last 2 years, we've spent $2 billion on clean energy projects.
2 billion out of 183.5 billion. For the people suffering from the impacts of wildfires, floods, and hurricanes right now, 30 years is too long to wait for your company to change. How do you square the reality of facts on the ground with your 2050 date to decrease carbon emissions?
Congressman, I have a project that I can share with you right now that's amazing. We've installed a 300 megawatt solar facility that's powering the only steel mill in the world with green energy. We are in action. We spent $1.1 billion to join an offshore wind farm just offshore New York. We'll spend billions behind that. And we are in action. We have very clear targets. And again, we have stepped forward that we would be reducing our overall production, our absolute production on a worldwide basis by 40% by the year 2030. So we are in
The world
action.
can't wait.
The gentleman's time has expired, and the gentleman may continue answering the question, but his time has expired.
I would just add, Congressman, that we do have near-term targets that are significant to cut methane, to cut emissions. 15% of our executive compensation pay is linked to sustainable emissions reductions. And I can just assure you that we're sincere, we're in motion, and we're taking action on a number of projects. And again, by 2025, we'll be spending $3 to $4 billion, $5 billion in 2030. So we are sincere.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay.
you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms.